Hello, in this video, we're going to be looking at what's going to happen in the 2022 property market in the UK. And I'm really delighted that, as well as me sharing my views, I've got another property expert, Ranjan Bhattacharya, who's a very good friend of mine, and a real expert in commercial property, who's going to be sharing exactly what he thinks is going to happen. Now, interestingly, we both did videos a year ago, and we had conflicting views about what was going to happen. So we're going to come together today to see what we think is going to happen and see what our differences were and see who was actually right at the end of the day as well. So welcome, Ranjan. How are you?
Very good.
In 2022, I think we need to just go back a little bit to 2021 and see why the property prices boomed so much. And I think there were a couple of reasons. First of all, back in 2020, mid-2020, when I expected property prices to come around, the Bank of England did, the government stepped in, put in some great policies, such as the stamp duty holidays, such as extending furlough, gave a lot of more confidence back to the market. Things such as, you know, the vaccine coming out gave a massive boost in confidence, and maybe we're going to be coming through this. And one of the biggest things was the introduction of the bounce back loans, many of which were probably used as deposits for properties. They weren't supposed to be, but they were. And so this caused this massive stimulation in the market, and people started jumping in and paying, as sure you agree, silly prices. And so that's kind of what happened. And obviously it continued into 2021. They extended the stamp duty holiday for properties up to 250 to September, extended furlough again. And this just helped the whole economy. And I think that's one of the reasons. Plus, the underlying supply and demand. At the end of the day, if you look at the way property prices have come up over time, there's just not enough accommodation in this country. And so whilst we always get ups and downs, as we know, the long-term trend in the UK is up. Now, a lot of people do say after a boom, you always get a bust. I don't think we're going to see a bust like we had in 2008, 2009, because that was very different circumstances. But I think we might see the market start to cool a little bit. Will it come down in some areas? Maybe a little bit. But I think generally, I think the trend's still going to be up. So I don't think we're going to see a big correction. That's my view. What do you think for this year?
I agree with you about the year ahead. But I think you're missing one of the main reasons why the boom happened in 2021 and why it will continue in 2022. Which is the I word, the inflation.
Yeah.
The money printing that went on in just generating all this money, extra currency, basically, that was just helicoptered into the economy.
Yeah.
Has created inflation. And the government is saying inflation is 5%. But I don't think that's anywhere near what the real inflation level is on the streets.
Well, certainly, if you look at building and building materials, I'd say 25–30% is more the increase in cost there. And that's partly because of supply chain as well. And yes. I think some people are taking advantage of that potentially. But, you know, anyone who's involved in actually building would say the inflation is a lot more than that. But I think...
yes, building materials, but just generally in the economy, everything has gone up by probably much more than the headline rate of 5%. But the actual rate of growth during 2021 has been 10%. And that is purely because of, I don't think house prices have gone up in real terms. They've just gone up as a hedge against inflation.
Yeah. And I suppose the big thing we should talk about as well, Ranjan, is interest rates.
Yes.
Because, you know, we saw the headline figure in November, I think it was 5.1% inflation. And then obviously the Bank of England decided the day after to put interest rates up for the first time in a very long time to 0.25%. And so what do you think is going to happen to interest rates over the next year or so?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think the government and the Bank of England don't want to raise interest rates. You know, that 0.25% rise at the previous Bank of England policy rate setting committee, they chose not to increase rates. And then the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, came out with a pretty damning report that pretty much said that the UK had to increase the interest rates because of this underlying inflation issue. So that's why they brought in this rise. But we've got to have a look at where it's risen from. It's gone from 0.1 to 0.25, which is still, you know,
still
not much.
Tiny, isn't it?
I can't see any possibility of rates being even 1%. in the next year.
Mm.
And the reason is that the government debt is so huge
Yeah.
that it would push up the government's debt serviceability for the national debt. And that's why they don't want to do it. They'd rather have a little bit of inflation and inflate away government debt than raise interest rates.
Yeah, which is interesting because obviously inflation is actually the friend of property investors. If we're borrowing money and getting mortgages, that erodes our debt, and exactly the same for the government, isn't it? So they printed all this money, and we're going to have to pay extra taxes to pay that. But if inflation is actually their friend as well,
and that's why people are investing in property. It's always been a fantastic hedge against inflation. It's always, and of course with leverage and buy-to-let mortgages, it's even better. But the great thing I think about UK property at the moment is it's all very well saying, I'm going to invest in property, I'm going to buy property and hedge against inflation. Great. But you've got to do something with it while you own it, which is obviously to rent it out. And rental demand has been fantastic this year. I mean, do you think it's going to continue into next year?
Absolutely. And I think we should talk about that because, as we said at the very beginning, one of the reasons property prices have gone up, I think, is the underlying supply and demand. And we got to look at changing social demographic trends as well. I know a lot of people, last year, we certainly saw a real boom in people moving out of cities and wanting to have, properties with gardens and a bit more space. And I don't think that's a trend that's really going to change. But also, I think it's people are seeing the opportunity they're not happy with what they've got and they want to move, they want to change. And I'm renting at the moment. I'm looking for my dream family home to buy. I live in Edgbaston and Birmingham, and it's a really difficult market right now. And my wife keeps on saying, "Come on, you're supposed to be a property expert, so we'll find me a good house." But it's very different finding a house for you to live in than it is a rental property, and there are very different emotions involved. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here, Ranjan. It's a interesting scenario, but I think, and so I've been on the renting end, and we found there's not a huge amount of great stock where we want to live. And when a good house comes up, we have 8 to 10 people competing for the same house. So I think if you have good property, and that is really important, because a lot of landlords unfortunately don't have good property, and we'll talk more about that later. But I think if you have really good property, there's very strong rental. It's really good time to be a landlord from that perspective.
But why is it, do you think, that rental demand is so good? I mean, do you think, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the amateur landlord, or the people who have got into it accidentally and perhaps are not doing it as a business, they've just got one property that they used to live in, they rent it out, they're selling up.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think for the last few years, we've obviously seen the effect of Section 24, which came in April 2017, whereas we all know, if you own property in your own name, which always was the best way to do it from a tax point of view. And if you have mortgages, which guess what, the vast majority of investors have to use leverage. And if you're a high rate taxpayer, now, not all property investors are, obviously, but if you've got a job and you've got property, there's a good chance you're probably going to be a high rate taxpayer. So of the approximately, I think, 2 million landlords, many of those will have been affected by Section 24. Now, some people have done various things. They might have incorporated or set up an LLP. There are lots of things you can do, obviously. But I do think, and we've certainly seen this at a very grassroots level, the property investor network meetings, there have been lots of people, particularly the amateur landlords, they might be an accidental landlord. They thought, you know what, with all this new legislation coming in, with the taxation changes, is it really worth me being a landlord anymore? And for some of them, it's not. They might have sold up. They've had really good capital growth for the last 10 years. They might have sold up, paid their capital gains tax, and they might have done something else. So they might pay down their own home mortgage, or they might have invested in cryptocurrency, which seems to be a big boom these days, or maybe they put money into a business, whatever. And I think people have redistributed their assets. And I think the amount of rental stock, now, it's just my gut feeling. I've got no stats on this, but I have a feeling that it feels like there's less property available.
I think you're right. I think there is less rental property available. I think that particularly there are certain areas where, from a yield perspective, because capital values are higher in some areas, and rental rents are relatively low, from a yield perspective, it doesn't make sense for new entrants to come into those markets. So as those accidental landlords have left, they're not being replaced with the with new landlords because the yields don't make sense in those areas.
Yeah, I think manager, let's talk about relating to that, about what strategies we think are going to work in 2022, because I think just coming in and buying a normal single let property in most parts of the country is not going to be a very rewarding strategy for you.
So what would you do then?
So I think there are 3 areas that I think work really well. I am still a really big fan of HMOs, houses of multiple occupation. However, the big caveat is you've got to do them correctly. There are a huge number. In fact, I think there is an oversupply of very average HMOs with the magnolia walls and the not very good furniture. And those landlords are struggling. I think there's competition. I think they're having to lower prices and probably attracting the wrong type of tenants. But when you have really good, high quality properties, they have a slightly more discerning type of tenant who's prepared to pay a higher rent. And this idea of co-living, where you're not just getting a room in a house, you're actually coming into part of a community. You know, people like that sense of feeling. And certainly I know a lot of people who were living on their own in studios or apartments. And when lockdown came, they had real mental health issues because of the isolation, and they just really want to be with other people. And
okay,
actually,
let me play devil's advocate.
Go on, go for it. That's the whole point of this debate, right?
Back in the old days, right, before you and I got into this game, you had what was called bed sits.
Yeah.
And as bed sits became a little bit untrendy, I think it became rebadged, and then the HMO label come
yeah.
and now is it? I mean, there is an argument to say that HMOs have just been rebadged co-living. Co-living is just HMOs. Instead of magnolia walls, you've got a sort of a trendy grey feature wall and some mustard fluffy cushions on the sofa. But fundamentally, it's a 5-bedroom house with a shared kitchen lounge. What is the difference between co-living and an HMO over and above how I just summarize?
It's more than just fluffy cushions.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Go on.
Okay, so I think there's a couple of things, and I think this is where I think the landlord has to be far more conscious of what their clients want. I think you should see them as clients, not just tenants, because it's someone actually who's coming and buying your business services every month for hopefully a good long time. And I think the key is really understanding how can you make the room a functional room for them. So it's not just about having some fluffy cushions. It's about, things like when you get your plug sockets, you should be having the USB charger ports in there and things. And it's thinking about, okay, how are we going to lay the room out? Where should those sockets be? It's thinking about, this person's going to live here with all their stuff in this room. Where's the storage space? What are we going to do? Is it under the bed, on top of the cabinets? It's not buying them a small little wardrobe to put their clothes in. It's having a really good size because they're living here. So I think it's putting a lot more thoughts into the person who's living there and the experience they're going to have in their particular room. And then it's about the thought that you're having in the house, in the community. So I am not a fan of putting kitchenettes into bedrooms and fridges, because I think that creates diversity, whereas actually you want a really good kitchen with a really big fridge and a really big freezer that's well stocked. And I think you can tell a good HMO when you go in, if the fridge is full of food, that's a good community. If there's only a couple of bottles of milk and some sausages in there, people are probably quite fragmented and living on their own. And then in that communal area, you need to have things like tables that are big enough for everyone to actually sit around and actually eat as a community, rather than having their food and sitting on their lap watching TV or going off back to their room. And likewise, in the outside space of the property, outside space is often ignored, but for at least 4 or 5 months of the year, we have reasonable weather. People might want to sit outside, having seating areas and covered areas and barbecued areas. It's just extending the air of the house and saying, look, there is more space for people to live in. And that's what I think it's community and experience. It's not just a room in a house. And that's what co-living means to me.
I think you're right. And I think that's, obviously, when you do that, the landlord has to put in a lot more effort into group selection and making sure you get people on that fit. And actually, I've done a few of these myself. And one of the things which is rather strange is that when you succeed at it, you kind of end up with a situation where 3 or 4 of your tenants decide to move out to collectively get a place together.
That can happen, yeah, absolutely, because they get on so well. Yeah,
they get along so well. You've done such a good job. Now, this is a bit like, I mean, there's a song in some musical. You say potato, I say potato.
Yeah.
You say tomato, I say tomato. You say HMO, I say CMO, which is a commercial building in multiple occupation. Again,
yeah,
it's similar in that what we're saying is multiple lettable units under one rooftop.
Yeah.
But when I talk about a CMO, I'm talking about taking a commercial building and either fully or partially converting it into residential use. So you might have a shop and uppers where you've still got a shop on the ground floor with 2, 3, 4 flats above, but the whole building is a CMO because it's multiple tenancies under one rooftop. But the advantage of a CMO, as I see it, is that it's let and forget, because we tend to create 1-bedroom flats, which are let as under single ASTs, and it is very much let and forget, and without all the regulatory compliance of HMOs.
Yes.
What do you see as the trends with the HMO regulatory compliance? I mean, what do you think about what I said as a CMO?
No, I completely agree. It's the same concept that sometimes people say to me, oh, I think HMO or CMO is more risk than a single let. And my view is, well, okay, I think a CMO or HMO might be more work in theory, but having said that, I don't manage myself. I get other people to do it for me. So it's no more extra work for me. But the point is, when you have multiple streams of income, that's less risk than you have just one tenant. And if that one tenant is that you're no income at all. So actually, I think when done correctly, HMO, CMO makes a lot more sense than just one single tenant. So I think the concept's great. I agree with you. I think there's going to be a huge amount of commercial property, and that's your real expertise that's becoming available. And that repurposing that, and the new permitted development rights that came in August 2021, those make that, they're very interesting. And I know you talk about this all the time, Ranjan. Most people are not fully aware of those. And I'm not completely up to speed in all of them because it's not my bag. But, I think the average investor hasn't got a clue that things have changed and there are opportunities. So I think there's a window of opportunity in the commercial world. And as we're seeing so many commercial landlords who had a real shock in 2020, for the very first time, they're completely guaranteed passive income from these big blue chip companies suddenly turned around and said, oh, we're not paying now. And I don't know what you think, but I think a lot of commercial landlords had a real wake-up call, thought, oh, maybe it's not as passive as I thought it was or guaranteed. And that's why I think we're seeing more commercial landlords setting up, as well as obviously the demise of the high street, which has been speeded up by the pandemic.
I mean, that's going to accelerate into 2022. And that's simply because those landlords often only bought those properties for that passive income. Development was never their game. No. So that it's time for those properties to change hands. And I don't see the death of the high street. I see a transformation of the high street. And what we're seeing, I mean, we got too many shops. So a lot of secondary and tertiary parades will go back to being residential, because they were residential at once upon a time anyway. But the main parades in desolate, deprived areas where no one's got a beam, those will suffer, because there's no point setting up a business if people in the area don't have the money.
No, exactly.
But in areas where there's prosperous footfall, we're going to see a transitioning of the retail environment to service sector, restaurants, and this sort of thing. And that's been facilitated by a fundamental change to the way commercial properties are classified with this usage class E. Because now you can make a newsagent into a restaurant or a bank into a restaurant without planning permission, which frees up people to repurpose commercial to alternative commercial usages.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think I agree with you. I think there will always be a high street, and I hope there is a high street in busy areas, because I think that's part of the community feel. However, I think that the use of those properties will probably change.
If you were to hang your hat on one particular strategy that you think is going to come of age, because there are lots of things you could do in property, and sometimes all the stars align for a particular strategy, a particular way forward at a particular time. What do you think is the strategy that's going to have its day in 2022?
Well, it's really interesting. I think it kind of depends, because unfortunately there is no one strategy that fits all. I wish there was, Ranjan, because our job would be a lot easier, right? If we could say, hey, you need to commercial to residential is perfect everyone. Well, no, it's not. Or HMO is perfect everyone. Well, no, it's not. And I think it's for the individual to be aware of all of the strategies that are out there with a certain level of knowledge, for them to rule in or rule out what's of interest to them, or what's going to suit them in terms of their resources, their time, their money, the effort they want to put in, the commitment, and then they can pick the strategies that are going to be right for them. So I think, we don't have enough accommodation in this country. I think there'll always be a demand for good HMOs. I think there is a massive opportunity for commercial to residential conversion, which is your speciality. But also I think that staycations and holiday homes are actually a really interesting business, because I like to travel a lot, and this is what I really missed the most from lockdown, I think, and I've started to travel again, and it's a pain, and it kind of gets easier, then it goes back a bit, and I still think that there might be future lockdowns or tier systems that will strain things, but when things open up, as they did in summer 2020, that was an absolute boom. And people desperate to get out, people who had money to spend, and accommodation was ridiculously expensive, but people were paying it. And I think anyone who'd managed to survive COVID probably did very, very well in those summer months. And I think actually, again, people who adapted and are flexible and maybe took their accommodation to when COVID first hit back in 2020 and all the hotels suddenly shut. I know a lot of my clients in London who had service accommodation, their tourist business left, but they started hosing contractors, because the building industry still was working. And so I think that there's opportunity in service accommodation. However, again, you've got to recognize that is a business, and you've got to treat it like a business. It's not something you can just dabble with part-time. You've got to put great systems and processes in place. So again, there's lots of strategies that I think will work really well in 2022, but you've got to take the time to work out, given your circumstances, which one might be appropriate for you.
But you've got to be adaptable and flexible, because if you have your serviced accommodation in Bognor Regis, it's fine when people can't travel and all of that, but as soon as you can travel, I wouldn't want to visit Bognor Regis. So
no,
you've got to make sure that there's an underlying AST market there, so that you can flex and adapt.
You always want to have a backup plan. Absolutely, always have that exit strategy. But I think there's certainly, for the time being, there's opportunity, definitely. And what I would say is that, I'm a big fan of creative finance. I know you are as well. And actually, one of my favorite tools that we use is a purchase lease option and purchase option, which, as you know, Ranjan, actually came from the world of commercial property in the first place. But actually, when you understand them, and the problem is the vast majority, probably 99% of investors they don't even know what they are. If they do, they've got a really weird concept of how they can be used. When used correctly, and again, they're not suitable in all circumstances, but when we use those tools in the right way, they can be used for commercial to residential conversion. They can be used in SA, they can be used in HMOs. And it's about having a toolkit of strategies and tools you can use based on the circumstance of the seller to come up with this ethical win-win. So I'm a big fan of finding someone who needs to sell a property, then working out what you can do with it, rather than just be pigeonholed, I'm only doing this one thing.
It's absolutely correct. And I think the option strategies work particularly well with commercial now and with permitted development, because you can actually secure the site with an option agreement, put in your plans for permitted development. 56 days, you've got it. And as soon as you've got that, you've increased the value of the property.
Yes.
So then you're able to exercise the option at a uplifted value, which is often more than the purchase price.
Yes, indeed. And then especially if you
do the deal with not much money.
And if you buy with bridging, you can often get a valuation based on the value, not just the purchase price, which then minimizes the money you put in, And so you're getting a much better return on your investment. So yeah, these are the tools, but so many people, you know, are completely unaware of these tools and just don't get it. It's a real shame, I think. I do hope you found this video useful, guys. Just to summarize what we've talked about, Ranjan and I are both pretty much of the opinion we're going to see the UK market continue to rise in 2022. Obviously, the risk of interest rates is a concern. However, we both feel that the Bank of England and the government don't really want to put rates up. So we don't think they're going to come up much this year, even though there is inflationary pressure. We talked about the different strategies might work. We agree commercial to residential, huge opportunity. And Ranjan, by the way, is the real expert on that. So you should definitely go and check out his YouTube channel, which is Succeed in Property. I'm going to put a link down below so you can subscribe to that as well. And also, I believe that HMOs, when done correctly, this kind of co-living concept, huge opportunity there. And I think also serviced accommodation. Again, when done correctly, treated like a business, there's huge opportunity there if you know what you're doing. So guys, I do hope it's been useful. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to line up another video for you to watch. I think it's going to be useful. And click on the link below in the description to not only join Ranjan's YouTube channel, which is Succeed in Property, but also click on the link to come and register for my complimentary training all about options and purchase lease options that most investors just don't understand about. So you can get a massive competitive advantage if you have those tools in your investor toolkit. So I'd like to thank Ranjan for being here. Thanks so much, Ranjan. It's always great to share time with you on air like this. And I'd encourage everyone to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. See you in the next video. Hey, I do hope you've got massive value from watching this and the other videos on this YouTube channel. I've prepared some extra training all about purchase lease options, which is the most powerful tool you could use to control property and works with every other property strategy. You really do need to make sure you understand about this. That's why I put this extra training together for you at no cost. All you have to do is click on the link below the video, come and fill in the details and you get access to that training. And I really think you should definitely do it right now. I've also lined up another video for you that I think might be interesting for you to watch as well. So until the next video, remember to invest with knowledge, invest with skill, and click on the link and come and join me for that additional training all about purchase lease options.